Hi, this is Steve with Thresher Media Group. Welcome to When You're Ready to Listen. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the truth about God, things you may not have understood, may not have been taught, or quite frankly, had a very hard time believing. And since our entire relationship with God rests on believing, it is important we learn how to separate the truth from the many lies and fictions that abound within the religion of Christianity. So when you're ready to listen, tune in and discover a pathway to freedom, encouragement, life, and hope. Episode 97, Revelation 12, verses 3 through 4. In our last podcast, we studied the birth of the child and began examining another sign that was caused to be seen in heaven, a dragon. Revelation 12:3. Then another sign was caused to be seen in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, now having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems. We did a deep dive into this image of the red dragon and the 7 heads. Now let's pick up with the 10 horns. 10 horns. The dragon also now has 10 horns. According to the code, horns are a symbol of power and status, as horns are an animal's weapon to attack and to defend. In our earthly realm, these horns would represent military might and weaponry. So we must ask the question, are these horns to be understood in a physical capacity, human-led military might, or some sort of spiritual weaponry? The simple answer is probably both. According to the code, the number 10 is associated with the divine order of human affairs. Thus, there are 10 spiritual powers or rulers of might, which are connected to 10 kingdoms in the realm of humanity, which the dragon utilizes to enforce his will upon mankind through the use of threat or military might. These 10 horns sit on the 7 heads of the spirit princes, and like an animal, they are weapons used by the dragon to attack and to defend. Horns of the dragon become the horns of the beast. We will learn in Revelation 13 that the dragon gives his power, throne, and great authority to the beast. Thus, when we are first introduced to the beast, he is imaged as having 7 heads and 10 horns, upon which sits 10, not 7, crowns or diadems, that which he received from the dragon. Apparently, the dragon also works through agency, as he tends to mimic that which he has learned from God. This is important because much of the information we have on the horns comes from the time when the beast will take authority over the 7 heads and 10 horns, upon which sit the diadems. Accordingly, in the book of Daniel, God shares a vision with Daniel of the kingdom of the beast, and Daniel said it was a terrifying vision and disturbed him greatly. The beast which Daniel saw was dreadful, terrifying, and it was extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth and 10 horns. And we are specifically told that these 10 horns are 10 kings that will arise. Therefore, we should expect to literally see a coalition of 10 kingdoms, countries, states, or whatever, from which the kingdom of the beast arises to power and assumes control on this earth with the use of or threat of military might. But more on that later. The mismatch of the heads to horns. It should be noted that there is a mismatch of horns to the heads, with 10 horns distributed over 7 heads. Now, in the same vision where Daniel saw the beast, Daniel said that he was contemplating the 10 horns when another horn, a little horn, came up from among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by their roots before the little horn. So we know that at least one of the heads has 3 horns. 7 diadems on 7 heads. And on his heads were 7 diadems. So far in Revelation, all we have seen are crowns of victory, or in the Greek, Stephanos. The saints who are now overcoming are promised crowns of victory. The woman who is clothed in the sun is adorned with the crown of victory. And the rider who sits atop of the white horse, the first horse released with the opening of the first of 7 seals, is wearing a crown of victory. But these 7 diadems refer not to crowns of victory, but they are a symbol of royalty. Spiritual royalty. This communicates that the 7 heads are beyond just powerful spiritual leaders. They are kings. Revelation 17:20 states this explicitly. They are deemed in the spiritual realm to be royalty, and they have been given charge by the dragon over territories of the earth, each with their own designated territory. These 7 heads are the kings of the earth referenced in Revelation and across the Codex. Because these 7 heads are kings, the upper echelon of the spiritual princes, they bear a title of royalty or a rank of highest stature among the angelic entities. Accordingly, they are of the kind of power and glory like the angels Michael and Gabriel. In the book of Daniel, Michael is referred to as a prince, a title of royalty. And Gabriel is identified as going to war against other spirit princes, which would indicate that he also bears the rank or title of royalty, that of a spiritual prince. Earthly royalty. These 7 heads, these kings of the earth, likely administrate the dragon's authority over 7 territories, the way in which the dragon has divided up the earth, each of them a king over their territory. Loyalty to the dragon. We'll find that these kings are loyal to the dragon, but they are not mere puppets of the dragon. They too must be convinced to follow the dragon's plans. We find out in Revelation 16:13 through 16, that the dragon sends unclean spirits like frogs to croak and croak at these kings to gather them for the great battle at Armageddon. Where demons come from, the dragon's tail now sweeps. Revelation 12:4. And his tail now sweeps away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Let's keep in mind that this image of the dragon is a picture depicting a terrifying and indomitable monster, one that can only be subdued by its creator. It's an image of strength and might, so much so that his tail now sweeps away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Yes, there is an intentional mismatch of verb tenses. Dual imagery of the stars. As mentioned previously, according to the code, stars have a dual meaning across the codex. For instance, when there are 12 stars and they are connected in imagery with the sun and the moon, they are a picture of the sons of Jacob and their religious offspring. Perhaps the image even encompasses the angels that are assigned to each tribe and their offspring. But when the codex refers to stars in the heavens, it's addressing angelic beings, sometimes the good angels and sometimes the demonic angels. Clearly, in this instance, this speaks of the angels who followed the dragon in his rebellion to Yahweh, and those who even now are succumbing to his lies. In this image, the tail of the dragon now sweeps away is rendered in the present active indicative. Hence, it is happening now, and that is a statement of indisputable fact. However, threw or cast them to earth is rendered in the aorist active indicative, explaining what has been done. So while he now sweeps, he has thrown them to the earth. Again, a statement of fact. We will address this mismatch of the verb tense, the use of both the present and the past, when we discuss how Satan gathers angels to his side. But first, let's address this issue of thirds. A third. This idea of thirds jumps off the pages of the Codex. It seems that the Spirit is obsessed with thirds. 185 times a third of something is mentioned in the Codex. A third seems to be a very odd and yet specific calculation. Expressed in its decimal form, it would be rendered 0.33333 and continuing forever with more threes. Thus, this calculation or this expression bears the mark of divinity. With the number 3 being code for perfection, we are to understand that everything identified as a third bears God's thumbprint, so to speak. In other words, the Spirit does not want us to miss the importance of anything he is associated with a third, for from beginning to end, it is an expression of perfection, an expression of the Godhead, the only one who is perfect and whose works are perfect. In Revelation 8 and 9 alone, a third is used 15 times to describe the 11 judgments brought about by the blowing of the 7 trumpets. The instrumentalities of these judgments are hail and fire mixed with blood, something like a great mountain burning with fire, a great star which fell from heaven, burning like a torch. The sound of the fourth angel, the four angels, fire, smoke, brimstone. And the objects of the judgment, each with a third being directly impacted by its respective instrumentality, are the earth, trees, sea creatures, ships, rivers, waters, sun, moon, stars, mankind. Each of these judgments were expressed in code, and their associated objects of judgment were also expressed in code. But they bear the mark of God, as they are perfect in both the instrumentality used and the object or the target of the judgment. The same expression of thirds is used in connection with the fallen angels. The dragon, with his tail, now sweeps away a third of the stars of heaven. Again, code for angelic beings, and threw them to the earth. What this means is that even the fall of the angels was and is plan A, for it bears the mark of perfection. It bears the thumbprint of God. Yes, Yahweh used the instrumentality of the dragon to bring about the judgment on these angels, but it was still all according to the sovereign design of Yahweh Adonai, Yahweh, the Lord of Lords. We do not normally think about praise and worship in connection with the demonic, because they are so creepy and awful in all they do. But because they have been thrown from heaven to the earth, fallen from their original position and purpose, we have another reason to rejoice and to praise God. Once again, we can have confidence that nothing happens in heaven or on earth that is random or outside of plan A, the plan which God established from before the creation of time. It is all working according to his design. Therefore, we should not fear these creatures. They are just tools in the hands of our God, accomplishing his works, even though they probably do not fully grasp their utility to him or to us. Nevertheless, their having fallen from heaven to earth is marked with the symbol of perfection. Hence, the Spirit references a third of the angels or the stars of heaven. How Satan gathers angels to his side. We know that the devil, the accuser, is a liar. And when he speaks a lie, he speaks from his nature or from his very personhood. For he is the father of lies, the one who deceives the whole world and those who dwell on the earth. One of the lies that he has told himself over and over, a lie which he has somehow been able to convince many angels to believe, is that because he is so ridiculously glorious, mighty, and powerful, quite unlike any of the other angelic beings, and with nothing on earth being like him, that one day he will find a way to overthrow Yahweh, take his throne, and sit as Lord over the realm of heavens, the stars, and mankind. Isaiah 14:12-14. How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth, you who have weakened the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Quite the audacious boast. But given his vast following, these angelic beings, the stars who follow the dragon, must be convinced that when the dragon ascends to the throne of Yahweh, that they will ascend with him and rule with him over the kingdoms of heaven and mankind. The dragon likely made the same promise to the angels that Jesus made to those who are now overcoming, that they will sit with him on his throne and rule over the nations with a rod of iron. Now, going back to the verb mismatch, with sweeps being rendered in the present active indicative, and through them to the earth being rendered in the aorist active indicative, a form of the past tense, we can conclude that even though these angels have been thrown down to the earth or cast out of their place and position in heaven and have no opportunity to return, it seems that there are times when they are not fully convinced that the dragon will win, and they are not fully convinced of the lies they have been told. So the dragon must sweep them again to keep them in his fold. Perhaps some of the angels have wanted to disengage, seeing that Yahweh always ends up with the upper hand. And perhaps some of them have come to understand that they are just tools in Yahweh's hands sent out to render service for the sake of those who will inherit salvation. And so with his tail, the dragon sweeps them once again to ensure that they hold the line of his ridiculous lies. The tail, the prophetic. The dragon sweeps these demons away with what can only be described as false prophecy, and his tail now sweeps. Do you remember the locust-like demons with scorpion tails, which had the power to sting in their tails? They were released from the abyss at the sounding of the fifth trumpet when the beast was set free. In our study, we learned that according to the code, the tail is a representation of the prophetic voice and the use of prophecy to deceive. And the prophet who teaches falsehood is the tail. Thus, it is likely that the dragon claims to the angels that the ancient prophecies found in the Codex predict his ultimate victory and their victory. Hence, he utilizes these prophecies, which he distorts, just as he did with Eve, to convince the demons that one day the Lamb will finally be conquered and slain. For instance, to convince them that he is one who is full of knowledge, he likely predicted the destruction of Israel, the exile of Judah, the slaughter of the innocents, the children who were killed by King Herod in Bethlehem, shortly after Jesus' birth, the obliteration of Judaism at the hands of the Romans, the coming slaying of the two witnesses, and other such events detailed in the Codex as evidence of his great power, knowledge, and authority. The dragon probably even predicted the demise of the Messiah, although he was completely blindsided by the resurrection. Being a deceiver and a liar, the dragon leaves out and the demons fail to understand the rest of the story prophesied in the Codex, their abject and humiliating defeat that occurs with just a word. The use of prophecy to lead people astray is not uncommon. For instance, the Codex reveals an interesting exchange between Yahweh and a demon who says that he, the demon, will go and be a lying spirit in the mouths of the prophets of Israel's kings, that being King Ahab, enticing him to go to war with dreams of victory, even though God had already ordained not just his defeat, but his death. Similarly, in the church at Thyatira, Jezebel led the people into the depths of religious apostasy through the means of false prophecy. What occurred in the church is no different than what occurred in ancient Israel. And the false prophet who teaches falsehood is the tail. For those who guide these people are leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are brought to confusion. In like manner, with his tail of prophetic deception, the dragon even now sweeps away a third of the angels and keeps them bound to his kingdom of darkness. The dragon's a bully. We should understand that this angel is pictured as a dragon for a reason. He is strong, powerful, fierce, intimidating, and a bully. Thus, with his powerful tail of prophetic deception, he knocked the demons out of the realm of light and into darkness, and he now keeps them down. Satan's intentions: devour the child. Revelation 12:4. And the dragon stood before the woman, who now being ready to give birth, so that when she might give birth, he might devour her child. The woman Israel is pregnant with the child. This is an allusion to the Messiah, the Christ, the one who has the true claim to royal authority over the earth, the one who sets people free from the power of sin and death, that which Satan wields over the soul of mankind. Now being ready to give birth. If this is an allusion to the Messiah, however, why then would the Spirit render this part about the woman now being ready to give birth in the present tense and not some form of the past tense? Is the woman still now being ready to give birth? We must remember the Spirit is always intentional and precise. Therefore, he said things exactly how he wants us to understand them. So, how can this make any sense? Perhaps it is best to understand this through the image of the woman, Israel. What we know is that the woman did not receive her Messiah. She did not recognize the time of her visitation. It's as if the child was born for those of the tribes of Ephraim, Joseph, and Levi, primarily the Gentiles, to make known the riches of his glory upon vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory, not from among the Jews only, but also from among the Gentiles. As he says in Hosea, I will call those who are not my people, and here who is not beloved, beloved. And that shall be that place where it is said to them, you are not my people. There they will be called sons of the living God. Although the woman did not recognize the visitation of the child, we are told that there will be a second visitation. For those Jews who survived the Great Tribulation and who refused to take upon their forehead or their hand the mark of the beast, it will be as if the Messiah is birthed new unto them. As it is said in Zechariah, in that day I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication, so that they will look on me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and they will weep bitterly over him like the bitter weeping over a firstborn. So in a sense, from the perspective of this woman, she is even now being ready to give birth to her Messiah. Dragon's desire to devour. The dragon's desire was to devour, literally eat up the child soon after his birth. It is said of the dragon that around his teeth there is terror. Hence, this imagery used by the Spirit to describe the dragon's intentions is pretty visceral and animalistic. Just imagine a monstrous creature tearing apart a child and consuming it, leaving no remains. Still, this is a strange depiction. The dragon was not looking to stomp on the child, to torch it with the sparks of fire and burning torches that leap forth from his mouth, or to just tear it apart, but to devour the child, leaving no remains, leaving nothing for anyone to salvage. In effect, the dragon's desire was to wipe from the face of the earth every last remnant of this child. The dragon stood, and the dragon stood before the woman. Interestingly, the Greek text allows for the word stood to be what we call a parsed verb, meaning that it can be rendered in both the imperfect active indicative and the perfect active indicative. Both tenses represent the past, but the imperfect tense addresses the past as something that was done and completed, whereas the perfect tense indicates that there is some resonance to the past act. If that makes any sense? In other words, the result of the past act, the desired attempt to kill or devour the child, seems to be present or simultaneous even as the Spirit was speaking to John. Again, the act has a resonance about it that echoes throughout time. What this tells us is that the event actually happened. Satan tried to devour the child, to consume him. That's the imperfect. But it also reveals to us that his desire to wipe the child off the face of the earth still resonates throughout time, the perfect tense. In other words, it indicates that Satan desires to finish what he started and completely usurp the position of the true king. Attempt to kill the child. Working through human agency, Satan used King Herod the Great as a puppet in his attempt to devour the child. The story is told as follows. After Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem, some wise men, royal astrologers, arrived from the east seeking the newborn king of the Jews. They saw his star in the sky and followed it to Israel. These men were members of the royal magi in the kingdom of Babylonia, and they were following a 600-year-old prophecy that most likely had been passed down to them by none other than the prophet Daniel, who had been appointed chief of the Magi by King Nebuchadnezzar. After 6 centuries, they were faithful to their instruction. After seeing his star in the sky, they came to Israel to find the newborn king of the Jews, which obviously would not sit too well with the current rulers of Israel. King Herod was deeply disturbed by this news, and he called a meeting for all the leading priests and teachers of religious law, and he asked them where the Messiah would be born. They quoted him a prophecy from the Codex, which indicated that Bethlehem would be the city in which the chosen one would be born. Herod then inquired of the wise men as to when they first saw the star, as he was attempting to discern the possible age of the newborn. Then he requested of them that once they find the child, that they send him the news about the child, feigning that he too wanted to worship this child king. God, however, warned the Magi in a dream not to return to Herod. Therefore, once they found the child, they departed on a different route. Herod, he became outraged when he heard that the wise men had shunned him. Thus he sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, because the wise men had told him the star first appeared to them about 2 years earlier. Fortunately, God warned the child's father, Joseph, in a dream to pack up and flee the area and go to Egypt, since Herod was looking to kill the child. Joseph escaped with the child just in time as Herod's men came to Bethlehem and brutally slaughtered all the male children in that region. But the child was safe. Satan's plan did not play out as he had hoped. He had stood over the woman, waiting to devour the child, but God frustrated his plans. The ways of Satan. It is intriguing what we can discern from the story in terms of how Satan works on the earth and what kinds of people are most useful or available to him. Unless Satan physically possesses someone, as he did with Judas, the only active force he can exert is through unseen influence. Thus, he targets those, like Herod, who have given themselves over to darkness and evil, those whose minds have become accustomed to his voice. What this tells us is that Satan was somewhat limited in his ability to influence or have power over the immediate people who surrounded the child. For instance, we do not see one of the shepherds freaking out and attempting an assassination of the child, nor do we see Joseph or Mary going on a crazy rampage doing the unthinkable. The Magi did not suddenly try to assassinate the child. The hearts of and their minds were not given over to such darkness. Instead, Satan targets a man of great influence and power, the king of Israel, who is not really the king in terms of Judean lineage, but was made king by the Romans. He was a usurper, just like Satan was attempting to be. It was also well known in the Judean kingdom that Herod was a madman. It was joked that the safest person in Israel was someone who was not related to Herod, for he had many of his wives and children murdered on suspicion of treason. He also murdered a great number of rabbis. Herod's heart was accustomed to evil, for he was familiar with the voice or the unseen influence of Satan. And that made him a perfect target for Satan to manipulate and use in his attempt to devour the child. And it would have been successful if it were not for Yahweh intervening and warning Joseph to flee to Egypt. By the way, the attempted assassination and the slaughter of the innocents was prophesied in the Codex. Thus, this was not a surprise reaction by Satan, but a fulfillment of the word of God. The ways of Yahweh. Before we move on, we would be remiss to not mention the ways of Yahweh in contrast to that of Satan. It is intriguing what we can discern from this story in terms of how Yahweh works on the earth and what kinds of people are most useful or available to him. Unless Yahweh physically possesses someone via the Holy Spirit, the only active force he will exert is through unseen influence. Thus, he targets those, like the Magi, the wise men, who have given themselves over to the ways of faith, to those whose minds have become accustomed to his voice. This story reveals that Yahweh targets men who were committed to his word, even a word spoken 6 centuries before. Can you imagine? We tend to struggle so much as we wait for God to fulfill what he has promised. And with time being our worst enemy, we often tend to linger in our belief and become overcome with disappointment. But these men did not even receive the promise unto themselves, but it was spoken to the order of Magi long before. Still, they believed. Their faith transcended the enemy of time. Thus, they were looking for the star, and they were ready for the star. And when they saw it, they traveled over 500 miles and came to worship the newborn king. These men, these Magi, represent the ways of God as he works amongst humanity and secures those who are willing to believe that God will always do what he says, what he promises. It is just a matter of time. And with that, let's stop here, and we'll pick up on our next podcast with the male child who will rule the world with a rod of iron. Thank you for tuning in and being ready to listen. To get a free download of the full written transcript with all the scripture references footnoted, please go to threshermediagroup.com. That is THRESHER mediagroup.com. This is Steve with Thresher Media Group. When you're ready to listen, tune in.